Welcome to the Refold Roundtable podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things language learning. And in this episode, we are talking about toxic learning traits, something that I think we're all probably too familiar with. My name is Bree, aka Briz, and I am the social media person for Refold. I'm here with Gorg and Shiki. Gorg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. I am George or Gorg, and I run the community for Refold, and I like languages.
And Shiki, go ahead and do your classic intro.
Yes, hello. Classic Shiki here. Uh,
Classic Shiki.
I'm a Japanese learner, Refold Stage 2C, and I am a language coach for Refold.
Oh, I forgot to say that I'm like learning a language too. I don't just do social media. I'm also learning Spanish. I've been learning it for like the past 2 years and some change. And I am stage 3A, give or take. But I just say stage 3A to make it simple. And today we are talking about toxic language learning traits. I feel
But before
like,
we do that, I do want
oh,
to interject. Season 2 has started, and luckily, Gorg has reached out to a lot of cool people. So starting
oh,
next week, we should have just a lot of cool guests. I've got some linguists who are going to be coming on within a month or two. You know, they're kind of busy people. I got Keji from Kotsu.io. So look
oh,
forward to that
really?
starting next week.
Oh, that's gonna be so exciting. I can't wait for that talk. That's gonna be
We're moving
awesome.
up. We're getting some
We
real
are
Yeah.
linguists in here.
we are leveling up real linguist. George is a real linguist, okay? He's like
No, no,
I
I'm
Master
not.
Gorg.
These are
yes.
actual linguists,
These are actual
at
linguists.
universities. So
Whatever. No, that's awesome. I kid. No, that's awesome. I can't wait. But today, it's us, and we're talking about toxic language learning traits.
I'm
Does
ready to be
anybody
toxic.
I know
oh
you
Lord.
are. Shiki earlier in DMs was telling us this is my time to shine about toxicity.
I have a lot of
Uh,
feelings.
I feel like we all do. And I feel like even the word toxic is like,
So
I mean, correct me if
let
I'm
me
wrong.
let
I
me
think it's like
explain.
subjective.
I got
Please
some
do.
feedback that the Refold podcast appealed too much to normies, sort of the old school AJAT Mia folks who are like, "Where are my toxic people at? Your podcast isn't toxic enough." So I said, "You know what? We can be toxic. We put on a really good front here at Refold about not being toxic, but we all have our own
Yeah,
little sort of toxic mindset things that we just downplay or don't talk about. But Lord
it's
knows,
true.
even I have my own toxic things when it comes to language learning, immersion learning. So that's sort of what inspired this was where my toxic people at? Well, here they
Where are my
are.
toxic people at? Well, joke's on them. I'm a toxic normie. So sorry to disappoint. But anyway, who wants to start? George, what's your toxic language learning trait?
What is my okay. So I'll say I am actually super duper judgmental about people who are not native speakers who are learning. And
That's
you
awful.
know, yeah, no, it's just I see
That's
I see not so great output or word coverage in a book. I'm like, dude, you've been learning for 3 years. Why don't you understand this? And I
Yo.
definitely am incredibly judgy, but it's like I can compartmentalize it and like help them improve. But I definitely like compare myself to other learners of the languages that I'm learning,
yeah.
and it's not it's toxic. It's not healthy.
No, it's
I for
not.
yeah. And luckily with Filipino, I'm at the top of the food chain. But like with like Chinese, I'm like way at the bottom of the food chain. And like I see other refolders who like read for 8 hours in a sitting on on a Friday or a Saturday or something. And I'm like, I'm a loser. I am nothing. I cannot do that. Um, so like it goes both ways, but I definitely judge myself based on other people, and I judge other people based on myself. Um, And I always say it's the norm. People don't sound native, and tons of advanced Filipino learners or Chinese learners probably sound very understandable. Um, but they're not at my insanely high internal standard that I would have for myself, and then I judge them based on that. So, you know, I'm also guilty of judging imperfect output that's not early output. You have to output at some point, right? And we've covered it time and time again. Stage 3 people who are outputting make a lot of mistakes. They kind of
Yeah,
suck. I'll be honest.
bad
Stage 3 people
output doesn't
suck.
always equal early output,
And it's
because
not early output. They're ready for it. Per the Refold roadmap, they're ready for it, but they still suck when they do it. And I
yeah.
still have to overcome my tendency to silently judge, you
You
know.
know that what you're doing is wrong. Like, do you know that
No, I
judging
totally
is
know it's
wrong when
wrong.
you're
I
doing it?
totally know it's wrong. I know, but we're letting our inner toxic fly, right? We
I
pretend to be
know.
wholesome on the podcast, but we all have some toxic traits.
I
At
I
least we're
Uh,
know.
self-aware.
That's what I'm asking. Like, are you
we are
self-aware
self-aware
in the fact
wolves. Yes.
that it's Oh
Yes.
my gosh. Do you judge people too, Shiki? Like for their output
Phew.
abilities and things like that?
I mean, I'm not really in a position where I can, but I mean, I'm aware enough to where if I listen to somebody who is a Japanese learner, I
Yeah.
am able to tell if they have an accent or if they're not pronouncing things correctly, or if the pitch is off, or things like that. But I'm not really in
Yeah.
a position to judge them too harshly. It's just I can notice it because of getting all
Yeah.
the input. Maybe
Yeah.
when I get into outputting myself, maybe I can be a little more judgmental, but I am judgmental on the people who try to say that people learning Japanese pitch accent is a fad. And I'm like,
Oh, is it fad?
what? Yeah, it's like, so pitch accent is intertwined with pronunciation. Like you can't separate them. And if you're not using the right pitch on something, you're not pronouncing it correctly. It's kind of like with Spanish on the accents. Like if you use the wrong accent on a word, it can
Yeah,
change
it's a
to a
different
totally
word.
different word.
Yeah.
So if you don't use the right accents, you can't really say you're pronouncing the word correctly, right?
Yeah. No, I mean,
So
I'm with you.
yeah.
I don't think it's a
So
fad. I would
yeah.
judge that too. I could just imagine the comments, guys. Like, remember, like, we're self-aware. We know that it's not good to,
Yeah.
like, judge people and whatnot.
Yeah, it's
But I'm
like
with you. Like, it's not a
yeah.
fad.
Yeah,
Now, you
if
could
you're
choose
yeah.
to ignore it. Like, that could be
Yeah.
your choice, but
Yeah, yeah.
come
Like
on,
if you're
man.
learning
Like, it's a thing.
Spanish, you can decide, okay, having the perfect accent on every single word is not important to me. That's fine. You can make that decision, but I don't think
Sure.
you can say that it just straight up doesn't matter as like a general
Yeah.
sweeping statement. It's part of the pronunciation. If you want to
Yeah.
pronounce words correctly, you have to be using the right accents. Same thing with Japanese pitch accent. You can choose to not care about pitch accent.
Yeah.
It's fine. But if you are not using it correctly for whatever dialect you're going for, you're just not pronouncing words correctly, and you'll have to deal with the consequences of that.
Consequences.
You
Dang.
know, the idea that pitch accent is a fad is kind of strange to me because uh, there was a textbook published by Yale, Japanese the spoken language, and it was published in the 80s. And the precursor textbook to it that was published, I don't know, in the 60s by the same woman, Eleanor Hartz Jordan, I think, covered pitch accent. We have known about pitch accent for a long time. So, like, normies and weebs finding out about it seems to be relatively recent. But I feel like in Japanese as a second language education, it's been known.
Mm.
Uh, so the idea that it's a fad is kind of strange to me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what do you mean it does not matter if your stress is correct, right? Like it does matter,
Right.
right? Like you can
Right.
hear it there. If we say it stress wrong in English, you'll notice something's off.
I literally didn't know what you were saying until I had to, like, think about it.
Right.
I
Exactly. So
literally
It
had to stop and go, "Mature? What are you
yeah.
talking about?"
It's like
matter.
Mature.
it's like worst case scenario, you will not be understood. Best case scenario, you will just sound weird. So,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
you'll have to deal with that.
I wouldn't say that I judge people on their pronunciation. Does cringing count? Like, if I cringe, does that count as judging?
I think so.
Because, like, there are sometimes, like, I don't care if people speak perfectly, but there are, like, the classic I don't know, gringoisms, whatever, where people don't tap their R's, they don't roll their R's, they try to use like English intonation patterns and English accented patterns. I forgot what it's called. What kind of language is English? Like we're stress language, and they
Yeah.
try to add like stress emphasis in Spanish, and it's like totally different, and that drives me nuts when people try to speak Spanish with not even trying to change the pronunciation or stress patterns or any of that. That drives me crazy, especially when people are super high level and they're really fluent. And I'm like, come on. Like, at this point, you have to be trying not to. Because if I can roll my R's and not do stress patterns, like, you can do it too. And I'm not great, but, I guess I don't know. They're out there making money on YouTube, so it's probably me doing something wrong, but yeah, that like I cringe. And I remember I sent a video to my italki teacher, and this guy, he has this channel where he does the news in Spanish, but like I can't even like pretend to be have his accent. It's just so bad. But his entire account is in Spanish, and I sent it to my teacher and I said, "Please, for the love of God, like you have to tell me. You have to tell me. Do I sound like this person? Do I sound like this?" And she's like, "No, no, 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 no. You're fine. If you know what you're talking about and if you're comfortable, your accent is hardly there. If you're uncomfortable, then it's more noticeable, but it's mostly because you're hesitating and all that stuff. But you do not sound like that dude." And that made me feel better because I have her correct me on everything. But I guess that's judging pronunciation, but it's like it's more so just like
You know,
cringing. Like I just have to look
I
away.
think other I
It
definitely think
grosses
that
me out.
we as
It
language
grosses
learners
me out.
judge other learners more
Yeah.
harshly than natives judge any
Oh
of
yeah, for
us.
sure.
And I've seen it
Probably.
before. I've seen it before. Just outputting with other foreigners who are way under my level when it comes to Filipino. The level
Yeah.
of impressness that Filipinos had was capped. People who could hold a conversation, even if they maybe used more English words or had weaker command of some of the more arcane grammar rules, they did not seem to be any more impressed by me being, a little bit better than the people
Yeah.
who still had noticeable accents, but were still
Yeah.
conversational, or maybe they clunky use of English loan words and stuff. And I definitely see it. Like, I would not judge an English speaker, or sorry, a second language speaker of English as
No.
harshly as I judge my fellow language learners when it comes to my sort of passion
Mhm.
languages.
True.
So,
It's because we spend so much of our time in it. You invest. I think language learners in general, like you said, are more judgmental. And I think it's because we spend so much time practicing and doing input, or even people that don't follow immersion, reading their books and doing whatever it is they do. We invest so much of ourselves into it that it's hard not to take it personal when you see someone else doing something differently. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't want to feel like what we're doing is wrong, right? And I think subconsciously, it's hard to look at someone who's doing something different or has a different result and think, "Oh, that's totally fine," because we have invested so much of ourselves into language learning. And that actually dovetails into one of my toxic traits, which I've had to really work on in my life, which is language learning as an obsession instead of like a life enriching hobby that just enhances my life. um I think it's really easy to get obsessed with language learning and have it be something that consumes you. Um, and when I started learning Spanish, it was at the start of you might have heard of it. There was a global pandemic that I won't name in case YouTube hears it and decides to be mean to our video. But there was a whole global thing that was happening, and I started language learning, and that was my escape. I had just moved out of state into a new house in an area where I don't really know a lot of people, and there was a pandemic, and I just kind of threw myself into language learning. But I threw myself a little too hard, I think. And my toxic trait is that it's hard for me to like chill out and just enjoy the process. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And be too focused on, oh man, I'm not getting these things. Oh man, I'm not learning as fast as someone else. Oh, I got to get my hours in, to I woke up and I hit my minimums and that's great. And I feel like this is really making a positive impact in my life. Do you guys have the same problem? Or is it just me who's toxic with
100%.
yeah.
I yeah, I work third shift. I'm like tired and grouchy and deal with actual third world problems, and I definitely can be upset with myself for not hitting absurd goals.
Oh yeah,
Right.
me too.
Uh, and yeah, I definitely. It's sort of like it goes back to that toxic competitiveness. You're not only competitive with other people,
Mm,
like I said, you're
yeah.
competitive with
Yeah.
yourself too. You hold yourself to too high standards, and
Yeah.
um, it's just not reasonable. Okay, I mean, you can, right? It's no native language November, and a lot of people are already doing that. But I tell you, about 2 weeks ago, I got into like I don't know, like heavy metal in English, and it's just really really good. I was just really vibing, and it's like you shouldn't feel guilty about that, right? Like
Oh,
your
no, of
target
course
language
not.
just may not have something comparable, right? Like English is pretty good at times, like there's a metal scene in a lot of languages, but it might not be the same quality, right? So like, uh, you know, feeling bad about having native language content is a toxic mindset, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because as native English speakers, English has really good content. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
just facts.
It is
Yep.
facts.
I
And also not having it be your total personality too, you
mm-hmm.
know.
I'm
Yeah.
definitely guilty of being a language like learner as part of my identity, for sure. And again, I think that's where that hyper competitiveness comes into, you know, where
Yeah.
when it's such an integral part of your identity, it's very easy to be toxic about it.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, like I said, natives really cannot tell an intermediate speaker from an advanced speaker, like not
And that's
not in
what
day to day
matters.
life.
And that's what matters.
I mean,
Not
that's
You
your
know,
fellow language learners
uh
judging you, not Gorg judging your pronunciation or me cringing because you can't roll your R. What matters is how you communicate with people. But yeah, Shiki, sorry, I keep interrupting you.
no, it's fine. This is why Nihongo Jozu is such a huge meme because
Yes.
like they will compliment you even if you just say konnichiwa like really badly.
That happened to me. I was on italki and I forgot to change my language away from Japanese.
Mm.
And I forgot what happened. Like this Japanese person started chatting me up. I was on italki and they started sending me all this kanji and I was like, ah, kanji wa choto. And they're like, oh, okay. I like, oh, okay, very
Mm.
good. I'm like,
Yeah.
I literally just told you I like kanji is like way too much, man. Like, chill
Yeah.
out a bit.
Mhm.
But
So
now
I
I want to
have
do
Japanese,
something
right?
special. I want to do something
Uh-oh.
special this episode.
mm.
Okay.
Vanessa, you are very strongly opinionated. What are some of your let's give you the stage. Why don't you
Oh.
up your talk
Oh
time?
gosh. Let me get some
Oh
Uh,
popcorn.
god.
what are some of your toxic takes or things that you have?
Woo.
Ideas that you hold. You're smart enough not to talk about them in the community and like bring people down, but let them out. Let
Yeah.
them fly. I know you got them.
So I have a couple of things that they kind of feed into each other. So if anybody if you so you guys know me and I always complain about people who don't read instructions and people who don't take advantage of resources. And what I mean by that is like, okay, so the whole immersion learning, so Refold is relatively new. It's been around for almost 2 years. But the whole concept of learning a language by mass input, mass immersion, is not really new. You have
Mhm.
guides like Anti Moon, like way back in the day, and then you have AJAT, and then you have MIA, and now you have Refold, and then you have other communities that I can't even probably think of because there are just too many of them. But it's like you have a whole wealth of knowledge, a whole like internet library, if you will, of resources, instructions, tips, motivational things, any kind of advice under the sun for learning a language by input. And you still continue to ask the same questions over and over that have been answered 100 times before. Discord has a search function. You can use it. There's Google. There's guides that volunteers have taken their free time to write and that have answered your questions. And you would find 99% of your answers if you would
And
just read the resources.
can I butt in?
Yeah.
Search colon the name of the website and then space and then your search term. It's a magic
Mhm.
Google hack that
Mhm.
will
Too
let
hard
you
for me.
search any website. Okay,
I just
you can.
yeah.
I'm just gonna ask Vanessa. Like, I
Mm.
don't need to do that. I'm
So
just
if you
kidding.
wanted to search,
Vanessa.
if you wanted to search refold.la, you could follow that hack. If you wanted to search Reddit or
Mhm.
4chan or any place that has an immersion learning community, because we're being toxic, right? So honorary mention, right?
Yeah.
There are places out there, and you can search them, assuming that
Mhm.
you go to Google and you do what I just said. So
Yeah.
definitely make use of searches and resources that are already out there that people have put time into making.
Yes. I think it is honestly, if I can be blunt, I think it is very disrespectful of people's time who have volunteered their time to
Mhm.
write all these answers and guides for you and you don't take advantage of it. I can't really I don't know. I'll be nice to you when I answer your questions, but I will hint that this has been asked before. um and yeah, I mean, I don't I don't know. At this point, I think I've said it so much. My catchphrase is like use your eyeballs and read. Please, use your
Yeah.
eyeballs and read. It's there.
Now, what about you mentioned something about like a lot of new learners come in
Mhm.
and think that things that are tried and true will not work for them for whatever reason.
Yes.
What's your
Mhm.
toxic take on that?
So, like I said, there's been this whole history of learning a language through input. And there have been thousands and thousands and thousands of people before you who have accomplished this. And unless you have some kind of learning disability or some kind of cognitive difference, so we're excluding those kinds of things disabilities, cognitive differences, learning disabilities, anything like that. Excluding all of that, um, we all have the same brain. We all use our eyes to look at things. We all use our hands to grab things. There's
Okay.
not really much difference. If it has worked for thousands and thousands of people before you, um, you are not unique. It is going to work for you too. I understand that diving into something like this that feels really strange. Like I'm just going to watch a TV show for 100 hours and I'll understand something. What do you mean? But it's worked for other people. It will work for you too. You just have to embrace the mindset and you may think your situation is unique for XYZ reason. Like, oh, what do I do? I took a class in high school or college. What do I do? Will this work for me? Or I lived in the country for 10 years and never learned. Is this going to work for me? You can pretty much replace any reason in that
As a
sense. It'll work for
person
you.
who's been an expat in a couple of different countries, the reason why immersion didn't work is because a lot of people, they move to the country and then they proceed to get all friends from the same language speaking like area of the world,
They're in a
or
bubble.
they're in a bubble. They're in an expat bubble, and it's like super big. In Mexico, there were English bubbles where like Western Europeans, North Americans all kind of like hung out. Um, and it's even more prevalent in Asia, where like again, uh, there's such a stark difference in expats and local people, and it's always really funny to me when people talk about like, oh, I lived there for 10 years. Yeah, you lived for 10 years in an English speaking bubble,
hmm
and that is why you did not improve.
It's kind of the same level of ridiculousness to me, thinking that it won't work for you. Like, let's say you are given a car and you've never heard of a car before. They're strange to you, whatever. But cars have been around for hundreds of years, a long time. And they're all pretty much designed the same. Some little things might be different, like the engine cylinders or the type of tire, whatever. But they all pretty much work the same. If you press the gas pedal, it'll move as long as you're in gear. So that's kind of how we all are. Our brains will all do that. If you press the gas pedal, it'll work. So people who are skeptical that it'll work for them, it's the same thing as a car. It'll work. Don't worry. It's worked for everybody else before you.
Hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm inclined to agree. Krashen's hypothesis, right, is that we all learn languages in one way, which is by understanding input. So, I mean, I'm inclined to agree. Yeah. Yeah. Just do
Y'all
it. Just
toxic.
immerse. Uh,
Y'all toxic
and
AF.
I think we kind of touched on our own personal toxic traits, but luckily the community has submitted some toxic ideas or traits or so on and so forth that they themselves hold. And one of them is fact one, get good scrub. Um, and I feel like Vanessa, I feel like you would really relate to this. So for people who do not know, Refold fact one, FAQ one is just immerse. Uh, it sort of it definitely annoys a lot of people coming into immersion learning and coming into the Refold community because like it can be annoying asking a question and being told just go consume more of the language. But I definitely am inclined to agree. Um, just
I have an
immerse.
example.
Give us your example.
So,
You
if
do.
you're learning Japanese, there is this construction where it's like if you want to say you like something, or rather, if you like a person, because you have to use a different thing when you're talking about a person. So you would say the person's name, no koto ga suki. And it's like if you are not familiar with the language and you see the translation and you see, okay, person's name, possession, so this person, and then you know ski ga ski is like I like this person, but then you're wondering what is the koto for? It doesn't seem to have any kind of relation. Like why is it there? Can't you just take it out? And it's like this is a situation that you have to follow FAQ 1. Of course, if you're a new learner without a lot of exposure to this construction, it's not going to make sense because you're translating it literally and thinking about it like it's English. But it makes sense if you just hear it a bunch of times. And in these situations, you just have to get more input. If you try to explain it, it's not going to make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that more input can be the cure-all. Again, I'm a big fan of looking at grammar references and the odd grammar drill here and there, a little bit unorthodox, but it's definitely something that I think a lot of people in the community have stopped doing, at least outside of the Japanese learning community. Whereas it used to be very prevalent when a new person would join, you would just tell them, shut up, go immerse, go consume more of the content, consume more of the language, and you'll figure it out. Um, but I definitely think there's an old guard, the 4chaners, the AJATers, the Miaers who really, really still believe it, even if they hold it in for the sake of peace and harmony among their fellow learners. And I suspect that they're not in the minority. Um, I think that get good, go immerse is definitely a mantra that a lot of people could aspire to. Um, Another community submission about toxic traits was looking down on learners of quote easy languages. And
Yes.
okay, so Bree, as a quote learner of an easy language, how do you feel about
Yeah.
that?
I hate it. I feel it all the time. Spanish is quote unquote easy, but it's not. It's just less hard. It's still really hard, it's just less hard than something like Japanese or Korean. And I feel like it's really easy to get into, but in my mind, probably just as difficult to master, right? Just because we have a head start doesn't mean that, completely rewiring your brain to hear other words and phrases um instantaneously as meaning. I don't think that's really any easier just because there's more of a head start.
Yeah, I
And
can't
in the
lie.
Refold
I've
community
been judgy.
specific, I know it's fine, but like, in the Refold community, like I've brought up a couple of times how like, Spanish grammar can be hard. And it is hard, okay? But I got, what? Are you kidding me? It's so easy. You're not even learning Korean or Japanese or Chinese or insert some Asian language. And it's like, what? Just because it's not as hard doesn't mean it's not difficult. Like,
No,
you
no,
do
no,
it,
no, no,
Kevin.
no, 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 no. This
You
only
learn it.
applies to East Asian languages. They don't
Okay,
care about
East
people learning
Asian languages,
Filipino. They don't care about people learning Mongolian.
which is
You know,
super hard, by the way. Like, I
um,
never think of Filipino as like some easy languages.
it's very much an East Asian language bias, and you're right.
Well, learner
It's a
bias.
toxic idea. It's a learner
Learner
bias,
bias.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But
Um,
I don't think they'd think that I was if I was learning something like Filipino, I don't think I'd get
but
the
it's
same
funny
like
how
vitriol.
the toxicity people punch down. So the Korean learner will make fun of the Russian learner. The Russian learner will make fun of the German learner. The German learner will make fun of the Spanish learner. And
Oh yeah.
I would say this casual toxicity about my language is harder than yours is the least checked because it's really not that harmful. I don't think like it at the end of the day it's
Annoying.
like, okay, you're not a learner of the language, you don't really know. It's annoying for sure, but I don't feel like it's that toxic. Like it's toxic and it's worthy of a mention.
It's kind of
Because
in
like
the
it,
same category as banter between
No, I
learners.
think it's
yeah,
toxic
it's
and that it's some sort of
I mean, yeah.
elitism. Like, why would you
Yeah.
waste your time? It's like, why are you wasting your time learning that language? It's so simple. It's
Mhm.
beyond just banter. It's like an elitist mindset of learners where why don't you learn a real language? And
Yeah.
it's like, excuse me, I have toiled for years. And even if it was easy, it's hard for me, okay? Like I'm having
it
issues with
definitely
grammar.
downplays
That
learners'
doesn't make me
struggles.
stupid, it
Mhm.
just means that, like, I learn differently than you or something, I don't know, I'm sorry that I can't just memorize things, watching things over and over and over, Lord knows I have tons of input, but, you know, there are some concepts that are just really difficult to wrap your brain around, even in Spanish, oh my gosh, like,
Mhm.
it's not a totally easy language, not to
You're
mention the
valid.
conjugations and
I
stuff.
understand.
Thank you,
Definitely,
thank
all
you,
languages
thank
take
you.
time to learn.
They do, because you have to like retrain your brain. And it's especially if it's the first foreign language that you're learning, which Spanish is. I've never learned another language to fluency or gotten to even an intermediate or low intermediate or advanced beginner level in any language. Spanish is the furthest I've gone in any language. So it's tough. Having to like rewire my brain, refold my
Aha.
brain into Spanish, and that process is difficult no matter what language it is. It might be more difficult, sure, for other languages, but it doesn't make it not hard. Boom, roasted. Like,
Yeah,
get
I
off
mean,
my back, man.
I
Again,
can't help
you know,
I
I
feel
don't want to like
spicy
take
about
any
this.
sides here because I've got my own toxic takes, but uh, that was a community submission. So I'm not saying I believe it or not.
No,
It's
it's
not my
fine. We're
toxic, but it's
we're
definitely
we're
something that I
toxic
think
this
is pretty
episode.
common.
And do you know what's
And
even more toxic? My reaction to it.
your
My
reaction
my
was very toxic. I think it definitely
Thank you.
touched a nerve.
Because one of the things, like, when language takes up so much of your life, like, you want, like, seeking that external validation, I feel like a lot of times, sorry,
Lord,
this is taking away
I
from the
could
community stuff, but
ramble.
this is mine. Seeking external validation, like, oh, am I doing this the right way? I need, is this a good show? Is this whatever? How am I doing? I don't need anybody to tell me that. But when I get negative validation, it really really puts a rain on my parade when the only person I need to impress is myself, you know?
tell them.
Well, I
Tell
could
them.
be toxic
Tell
about it
me.
because one thing that's really funny to me, and you see this among different language learning groups,
Yeah.
somebody will be learning like Korean, okay?
Uh-huh.
They act like it's this big, massive language when it's like South Korea has like less population than Germany. It's like the size of New Jersey. Korean as a total has like maybe 80 million speakers, which again not super big on the global scale. And you definitely like it's like reverse toxicity, judging the people who are learning the so-called prestigious languages that really aren't that impressive. You know,
Mm.
like there are not that many Koreans in the world. It's mostly spoken in Korea.
There's
Um,
so much K-pop though. There's
Yeah.
so they have a
so much K-pop.
very like salient, palpable pop culture. That's true.
Yeah.
But they're like, "Oh, I could never learn a small language like Thai." And I'm like, "Dude, Thai has like 12 million less speakers than Korean. What do you mean it's a small language?" And I'm not a Thai learner, but it definitely is one of those things where I'm like toxic about it because they have this sort of inflated importance when they're a CJK learner, right? Chinese, Korean, or Japanese. So
Yeah.
Mm.
the toxicity goes both ways,
Yeah.
And
I I made the mistake of saying that like Indonesian was not a big language in the presence of George, and I got
I That is a
slapped.
death sentence. Why would you
well,
do
okay,
that?
but see, actually, unlike Korean, Indonesian is a big language.
Yeah, apparently.
Like
I learned.
it's like
Allegedly?
the world's
Oh my god.
most populated Muslim country. There are like over 200 million people who speak the language on a daily basis.
Man, we're
That's
getting so
actually a
canceled.
pretty yeah, it's a very big language. So people's perceptions are often wrong. And again, it's like you can't judge them too harshly because they only know what they know, right? Like
At
Indonesian
least
pop
I
culture is
learned.
not super big, although it is getting pretty big. I feel like they've got a big VTuber scene with like Hololive Indonesia, and
Yep.
like I definitely feel like more weebs are getting into it. Uh, but yeah,
Yeah.
people just don't know. There are no name languages in South Asia, like near India or Bangladesh, or in Africa that you've never heard of that have like bajillions of speakers. It's really wild. Um, and even then, it's like, what are these people immersing in, right? It's like, oh, I could never learn Thai. It's like Thai exports their boys love dramas all over the world. Like
Mm.
there's media to consume. The idea that there's not going to be media in any language spoken by any more than like a couple million people is crazy. It's going to be good media. That's a different story. So that's sort of my own toxic counter reaction to the judgmental CJK learners, I think.
There are people
And
that I say that I feel like I get smarter just by being around them, and George is one of those people. His knowledge just rubs off on me, and I'm like a
It
better
doesn't rub
person.
off on me, but, like, I appreciate it while it's
Yeah.
there, but it's like a flash in the wind. I'm like, "Oh, there's that knowledge, and it's gone. And it's gone."
unfortunately, not all knowledge is useful. This is not immediately useful stuff. Uh, I'm not contributing to the greater world good. I'm not earning a higher salary for it. If I could trade it all to be a dev or something, I would. Um, so moving back
No.
to community submissions for
Oh, yeah.
toxic behavior. Another person submitted immersion time is greater than everything else. And I think
Yep.
it's referring to like this user basically judges the amount of immersion time that a person's getting at the expense of other stuff, right? So like I personally try and praise people like, "Oh, great, you have a life and you've got a girlfriend and you're going dancing and like you're doing great in school." But some users are aware that they're like, "Oh, this person only got 5 hours in today. I got 8 in. I'm better than him." And it's
Mhm.
definitely a toxic mindset, and it's something I even have. Whenever I compare myself to other immersion learners who are pulling insane hours, I start to beat myself up over it. I really do.
Same.
Uh,
And you've, like, sent me screenshots of, like, your link, like, "Look how many words I've read today," or,
oh
"Look
yeah,
how
yeah,
many
no, I'm
words
super
I know."
competitive. I am, yeah, yeah. I definitely like the metrics. I'm like, yeah, I read 40,000 words this month in Spanish and 150,000 in Filipino, and that's like I don't know, like 4 books across. Like assuming it's like a small like
That's a
fifty
lot.
thousand word novella. That's like 4 or 5 across 2 languages. Definitely, I'm definitely competitive. I try and like tone it down because one, I would lose. I'm not the best in terms of like time management. I'm not the hardest score immerser. And again, it's just not a good look, right? We don't want to actively be toxic in our community. But like in DMs, I'm definitely toxic. Definitely like I read more than you today.
I know. And I think, like, there's something to be said for this where, like, in balance, this isn't a problem. Like, it's okay to be proud of what you've done. It's okay to be you know, think of what you've done as some sort of accomplishment. Like that's great. But when it turns into like the one of the deadly sins, like pride, then it's an issue when it's beyond just being proud of what you've done, and it becomes like aggressive or judgmental and things like that. But I've definitely been there where, you know, I get too competitive and I'll be excited that I read like 100,000 words or something crazy. It was a really good book in one day and just like, oh, I can't believe people can't do this all the time. And like the next week, like I couldn't
Yeah.
do it and I felt bad about myself because that was obviously unrealistic. Um, because it's better to have a life, but that kind of like ties into the language learning not being like a life enriching thing. It's a life consuming thing. I think it's good to put down the book and touch some grass, especially if you're immersing hours a day. But
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe that's just me. I'm old and I
I'm one
want to
of
do
those
it like
people
a
who
kid.
could immerse all day if I didn't have obligations.
Yeah, I don't think I even
You
have
know,
the
I
willpower for that.
couldn't. Even when
I
I'm
couldn't.
off,
I don't think I would either.
yeah, even when I'm off, I definitely kick up my immersion by a couple hours, but I don't spend the full day doing it. Um,
No.
so I'm not one of those people, you
Yeah,
know.
I'm the same way. I can up it, but I can't spend all day doing it unless I'm like binging a new series or binging a book. But I can't choose to do that. The book chooses me, not in reverse. It's like Harry Potter's wand, like you pick up the book and
Mm,
everything starts glowing and like, it's the chosen one. And then you read
yes.
it all day, but then you wait months for another book that sparks as much joy. And that's another episode, I guess. But
Another toxic thing that some people have is pushing people to show their output. Now, I personally
Oh, yeah.
don't have this, but this was a community
Oh.
submission. Um,
Oh.
some immersion learners want to see your output. And I guess it's sort of like putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
Um, does anyone here have that desire to like, well, go ahead, output, show us your Japanese then, right? Or,
Yeah.
um,
I do have that kind of like judgmental mindset. It's like, how can I trust that I know what you're talking about if you can't actually put into practice what you're talking about? And it's why immersion learning is so difficult to talk to family and friends about, is because a lot of the time you are not outputting until like a year, year and a half, 2 years into it. And it's like people are thinking, what are you doing all this time? What are you even doing?
People that think that output equals, I mean, it does, output equals outputability, but it
Yeah.
doesn't equal comprehension or any of that. And comprehension is a really hard thing to prove to people who aren't
Hmm.
like familiar with the language. I could be like, see this show? I understood it. And they'll be
Yeah.
like, okay.
I just have to take your word for it, I guess.
they
It's
would
like you
have
have
to
subtitles on,
devise a way to test you, right? They would have to
right?
like understand the show themselves and then like ask you questions or something. And on the
Right?
flip side, there
Exactly.
are some people who have really, really good output who their comprehension is kind of sus, you know?
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Facts.
I've seen some users who like they were very listening heavy and
Yeah.
they get really good. They have a really good accent, and then they're like, "I learned a new word in Spanish today," and you're like, "Oh, what was it?" They're like, "Viscoso," which is just viscous, right? It's like a basic word. It's like, so you're kind of wondering, even having good output, right?
You
There are
think
some
viscous
people
is
who
basic?
it's like a
Sorry.
cognate. Yeah,
Sorry
it's
to
like
like, that is not a, I mean, okay, it might technically be a cognate, but I would not in a million years go scoso. Viscous? Yeah, definitely. Or did
well,
you say viscous?
anyways,
Oh,
it's
no, yeah, yeah, yeah,
viscous.
no. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, yeah. But still, like,
Well,
this happens between us all the time. Like, there'll be like a book, and I'll send George like a snippet. This isn't like attacking you, by the way. This is just something funny. And I'll send a snippet, and he's like, "Oh, do you not know that word?" And I'm like, "No, why would I? Because it's a cognate." And I'm like, "How is that even a cognate? I don't recognize these patterns, there's something in your beautiful brain, your beautiful mind, if you will, that is so good at recognizing cognates. I don't have that ability. It's a lot harder for me. So I really empathize with people that might not get that. Sorry to go on a tirade. That's my
No,
toxic
no, no.
trait.
It's but the point is that even
The
if you
point
push
is,
people to output, right? And they might have really good output. I know I can think of one person um, who has fooled natives um,
yeah,
in VC,
yeah.
who very frequently has like what I would say surprisingly low comprehension of like literature and like reading and like more literary words, or I guess obscure words like viscoso, which is apparently now an obscure word. But
Who even knows viscous in English? Like, come on. But keep going.
the point is that even if you do press people to output, some people have really good output and their comprehension is a lot lower than you would expect, which is kind of a whole other whole other episode. But
That's true.
I
That's
will say
true.
there is this, and I get it, especially from people who make update videos, why they feel like this is toxic. Because a lot of times when you make an update video and you just want to share, like, "Hey, I did 1,000 hours of Esperanto today,"
Yeah,
or whatever,
Esperanto.
like.
That's my toxic trait.
Today?
Laughing every time
No,
somebody says Esperanto.
I sorry,
That's my
I
toxic
hit
trait.
I hit 1,000 hours of my in Esperanto today, like not all in one sitting, and they just want
Not
to share
judging
an update
Esperanto
video, right?
learners. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be Esperanto. It can be another language.
No, it has to be Esperanto. It has to.
And people are like, "Oh, you hit 1,000 hours in Esperanto. Go ahead,
Yeah.
output. Come on, show us your Esperanto."
Mm-hmm.
And that can make
Yeah.
people feel really bad. I get why it's toxic, right? Because like
It is
it kind of
toxic. And
makes you
I
into
feel
like a dancing bear. Oh yeah, come on, dancing
Yeah.
bear, do
but
the
do you feel like
dance.
that comes mostly from outside of immersion based? Like I don't get that inside of Refold. People aren't really pressuring people to output in
Mm-hmm.
Refold.
Because we
It's the
get it.
opposite. It's not only that. I mean, like there's a pressure to just shut up and immerse, right?
Yeah,
But like people
it's definitely something that you're right. It might not be coming from the immersion learning community, but it's
yeah.
definitely a reality.
Oh, totally. My family will be like, "Oh, say this in Spanish." I'm like, I
And
can't."
I can think of
Like,
coaching clients, Refold clients who have also had it. Maybe their parents are helping finance part of the coaching, and then they're like, "It's been 3 months. Why don't you say konnichiwa or something?" And then, um, but it definitely is
yeah.
something that was submitted to me as a toxic trait, and I think it is for sure. Like pressure to
Yeah.
output, judging people based on their output.
Yeah. I feel like an idiot right now. I've just realized that you said viscoso, not scoso. And I thought that like that was a synonym for viscoso that I didn't know. And I was like, of course you wouldn't know that scoso was viscoso. So
Um,
I humbly apologize, George. That is a cognate that someone should recognize.
okay, thank you. I agree. I feel like it's
I
a cognate someone
humbly
should recognize.
I apologize. But yeah, no, I heard scoso and I was like, that's not viscous, is it? But yeah, no, you're right. Viscoso. My bad. I was so confused for a second. I was like, I didn't get that. But yeah,
It
like
was it was a roundabout point of saying even if they have good output, they may actually have really low
I know.
comprehension.
I know. Well, I mean, like not to like beat a dead horse or anything, but like literature vocabulary, book vocabulary is so much different than like day-to-day internet slang hanging out with your homies on Discord, you know? Like it's a totally different
Well, the gap is huge, and this is what we talk about. We always talk about Paul Nation, or I always talk about Paul Nation. You guys probably don't.
I don't know
Paul
what that
Nation.
is, but I want to know. Tell me
You do
about
know who
it.
he is. Paul Nation is a linguist. He's really involved in like SLA, particularly acquiring like
Is he the Latin dude?
English. He's not the Latin dude. He's the dude who's
Ah,
like, you need to read like so many million words to cover so many much like word families to understand English.
no, I don't know this guy.
And he's always like something like in English, conversations happen at about 5,000 like like lemmas, right? Like a root word, right? Like go, going, goes, went are all going to be one lemma.
Right.
And he's like, conversation happens at about 5,000, but to read a book, it's about 9,000. And that's just for English, right?
Mm,
So, like, yeah, it's like literally double the amount of words you have to know to read a book. You know,
It's a lot.
we're in fairness.
It is true. And there's a lot more adjectives. I mean, yeah, of course. And it's a lot harder for me. Still, like I read all the time, but it's a lot easier for me to like listen to YouTube than
You
it is
do
to read a
really
book.
well.
Still.
I saw you post on the employee chat, like a vocab test that you did, and it estimated that you knew like 42% of all words in Spanish.
I was dumbfounded. I thought I was gonna get 10% and be like bottom tier, trash tier, but
And that was like
yeah.
double the other people who took the test. So like you must know a lot of words.
My toxic trait is that I was very pleased with that test. I I recognize a lot of words. I recognize. That doesn't mean that like I have internalized them and I can use them. My use is way down, but yeah, I
It's
just
even knowing
love
something like
hearing about
20% was like, oh, you've
was that
reached a level of a high level non-native speaker. And then you did like double that.
yeah, no big
So
deal.
like
I got like
that's
native level understanding. No big deal. According to that test, which I'm sure is 100% accurate. You
it
can't
seemed
see me
like a
making a
well
sarcastic
built
face.
test. It seemed like
Yeah, it's pretty good.
one of the more linguisticy uh
I was
tests out
scared
there.
too. There was a lot of words that I was iffy on, but I just didn't know if they're being tricky because if you checked one that wasn't actually a word, it
It harshly
penalized you.
penalized you.
Yeah. So I was overly cautious because there are words that I saw and I was like, that looks really familiar, but I don't know if they're like being tricky with the ending or something like that or the spelling. So I didn't select them, but yeah. Yeah, I guess my comprehension's okay, but yeah, my talks it's been really fun talking to y'all about this toxicity. I feel like this conversation needed to be had to prove that we're real toxic language
It's
learners.
been therapeutic.
It's been therapy. Like instead of the Refold Roundtable podcast, it's the Refold Therapy podcast from now
Yeah.
on. Just like toxic every week.
Yeah, I had to get
No?
my feelings out. So now
How do you
when
feel?
people yeah, I hope that when people listen to this, they will feel bad and they will go and read the documentation before they ask questions.
People
Yep.
I
don't
mean,
read.
I took 2 whole days reading all of the resources for Refold.
That's
I read the
because you're a
roadmap.
refolder. That's
I
because
read
you're a typical
I read the
Ah,
roadmap. I read all of
yes.
the documentation in the Japanese server. I
And you
read
probably
every
researched and had
FAQ
fun doing it.
before I asked any questions. If I can do it, so can you. You
But did you
listening.
like
I know you're
doing it?
listening.
Did
Huh?
did you like doing that though?
I liked empowering myself with knowledge because
Did you get, like,
I'm a
serotonin from did you get,
yes.
like, a little, like s see, that's the thing, there are some people like, that's a huge barrier. Like, me, when I get obsessed about something, I'm all in, right?
Yeah.
I read
Mhm.
every guide. I watch every YouTube video. Right now, my current obsession is camping, but, like, let's not talk about that. I don't camp, but I want to be. I want to be a camper. But anyway, I will watch every video, read every review, read every single guide, top to bottom, inside out. But, like, I feel like most people like, if they choose to learn a language, they'll go, "Yeah, that sounds fun. Let's do it. I'm going to begin. Oh, this seems like a nice community. Can some nice person point me out in the right direction?" Like, there's not like this like obsessive gorging
Yeah,
of
but that's the thing. You've already been pointed in the direction.
ah, that's
There's a
another toxic
guide.
thing that I wish that we talked about. Ah, like being obsessed about finding the perfect materials. A lot of people obsess about that and like they're
Yeah.
super toxic about like, oh, this is better by
Yeah. Being
0.43% and you will
yeah.
optimize
Oh,
your language learning.
that's like the toxic min-maxing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Being
Yeah.
that would have been
super
a great one to
neurotic.
discuss.
Yeah.
Very
Oh, I
neurotic.
just thought of that. Oh man.
Don't
But
be
even
neurotic.
beginners
This
too.
this Anki deck is 0.0001% more efficient than the
Yep.
other. If
Yes.
you're
Or
doing the other one,
and then
you're
like
wrong.
content hopping, then like material hopping, like going from like guide to guide to guide, app to app to app, trying
Just
constantly
relax and get
searching for the
input.
best thing.
Just
Yeah, I guess
relax.
All
if
roads
there's
lead to Rome. You know,
all roads lead to input.
if you're inputting and you're doing active lookups and roughly following the roadmap, you'll get there. But I definitely agree. Part of that toxic sort of immersion learning culture is the min-maxing.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. I feel like that could be a whole episode on itself, but anyway, to sub things up, y'all. It was so much fun talking about this with you guys, and I cannot wait. I say this half winking, half sarcastic. I can't wait to read the comments about this episode.
They're going to be spicy.
Listen, we were just being honest, and I think at the end of the day, we all know that what we think is, there are toxic things that we ourselves have to personally overcome and whatnot. And the most important thing, like George kept pointing out, was that natives, if you make an effort, they'll notice. It doesn't really matter what me or what I or George or Shiki or anyone else, any other learner thinks. What really matters is how you think about what you're doing. And at the end of the day, can you communicate? Are you understood? Do natives appreciate your efforts? And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Refold Roundtable podcast. If you're tuning in for the live premiere, make sure to join us for the after party immediately after the podcast in the Refold Discord. Link is in the description of this video. If you love this episode and want to hear more, you can listen to past episodes on YouTube and Spotify. And if you like this episode, please make sure to give us a like and leave a comment to let us know. We love hearing from you. We read every single comment. Legitimately, we do. And if you want to suggest a topic for a future episode, we would love to hear from you. You can suggest topics in the official Refold Discord, which again is linked in the description of this video. Have a great day. Don't be too toxic, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Refold podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening and maybe even learned something new. Projects, events, and content like this podcast are only possible thanks to our generous patrons. If you liked this and want to see more similar projects, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Visit community.refold.la/Patreon-benefits to learn more.